I've learned so many things every time I've gone back to therapy. It has taught me how to meet other people emotionally, which is one of the core elements of being interpersonally competent. It's not just about being empathetic. It's a version of empathy, but meeting somebody emotionally means that they feel truly, genuinely heard by you and met emotionally by you. Even if you don't agree with them, even if you don't see the world the same way they do, even if you see the situation that you're both in conflict about differently. And in fact, anybody who picks up a copy of our book, Connect, can read one of the last chapters, which is a chapter about a huge fight that David and I had, where I said I would never talk to him again. And how one of the ways we repaired that relationship was when I finally felt emotionally met by him, which I had not, and vice versa.
Hi, I'm Brian Wish, and welcome back to the One Away Show. In today's episode, we sit down with Carole Robin, a woman whose career path took her from industrial world of sales and automation to the emotional heart of leadership development at Stanford. But her most defining moment? A room full of men, a spark of emotion, and a colleague asking, "Are you human after all?" What followed was not just a 2-day offsite that changed her trajectory, but a life devoted to helping others connect more deeply. Carole's story is a blueprint for living with congruence, where how you lead, how you love, and how you show up become one of the same. Let's step into that story.
Carole, welcome to the One Away Show.
Thank you. Lovely to be here.
Lovely to have you here. Really enjoyed the first conversation and learning more about you and your life. So what's the one away moment that you want to share with us today?
Well, we're going to go way, way back in time, which is, this would be a little over 40 years ago. My now husband of almost 40 years and I decided we were going to get married. And once we decided we were going to have kids, and we were going to do things a little differently than most of the couples that we knew, meaning one of us was going to stay home with the kids to raise them until they got to a certain age, the youngest being in elementary school, well established in elementary school. And then we were going to switch places, and the other one of us was going to stay home and take them the rest of the way there, because we both wanted the experience of being full-time caregivers at home and full-time wage earners supporting our family. At the time, a lot of the couples we knew were both trying to do both, or one was choosing one kind of on a permanent basis. And we were both young executives on the rise in big companies, and this was the way we chose to do it. We called it the plan. It was our life's plan, and every decision we made in our life, up until through the raising of our kids and them going off to college, was informed by that choice.
Wow.
So I'd say that was probably a pretty pivotal moment.
Yeah, for sure. And unconventional maybe for the times. And it's pretty awesome that you were able to find a way to maybe hold to plan or hold to the plan. Now, I have a question for you. So if you don't mind me asking, how old were you when you met your husband?
31.
31. How did you know? I mean, did you know when you met him, ultimately this was important at a values level for me? And how did you, I have to imagine this was an early conversation, or maybe it wasn't, but how was it brought up and what was the response? I know that was kind of a double question, but for you, how did you kind of develop those values? And then two, how was that discussion, with your now husband brought up?
Well, a little context may be helpful, which is that my husband, Andy, and I had actually known each other in a different way, but had known each other for a long, long time. We were both raised in Mexico City. And we had met as kids in middle school. And I had dated his best friend in high school. And then we hadn't seen each other for a long time. And then we re-met when we were kind of grown up. And I was 31 and he was 33. And actually, I was 30 and he was 32. By the time we got married, I was 31 and he was 33. So we re-met and we already knew a lot about each other. You know, we'd been, we knew we had very similar values. We had very similar backgrounds in the way we'd been raised and how we'd been raised. All four of our parents had gone to the University of Chicago. We were from middle-class Jewish homes, raised in Mexico. It was the intersection of our lives was already pretty interesting. So it didn't take very long for us to have very meaningful and deep conversations about what do you want to do with your life and what's important in life. Also germane is that by then I had been married and divorced once before. He had never been married. And by then my career had really taken off. So had his. We were junior executives and in really big companies. Our career, we were on the rise. We had big potential in front of us. And the more we talked about it, the more it felt arbitrary. The first thing we established was that we both wanted to have kids. That felt like an important decision to make. The second thing we established was that we kind of didn't want someone else raising our kids. We wanted to be pretty involved in the raising of our children. And the third thing we established was that it felt arbitrary for one of us to give up our career. And so as we noodled on what were the potential options, I think it was Andy who said, well, what if we do something kind of unconventional and one of us stays home and then the other one of us comes home and the first one goes back to work? What if we switch? And I kind of liked the idea. I thought that was kind of a cool idea. And it seemed viable. And then the more we talked, we're both very pragmatic. And the more we talked about it, the more we realized that, first of all, it made more sense for me to stay home first. Because, to be totally pragmatic, I was the one with the breasts and I was going to want to breastfeed. So it certainly made more sense for me to stay home with the kids when they were really little and to start. And so then we decided when our youngest child was well established in elementary school, we would switch places. And then he would come home and I would go back to work. And I always intended to go back to industrial automation, sales, and marketing, which is what I had been in. I'd been very successful. I had a big career, and that's what I thought I would go back to do. And that's kind of what we did. We made the switch. We made the switch a little bit later than we planned because Andy was working for a very big company and all his options hadn't vested yet. So we waited until his options vested. In the meantime, I decided that rather than go back to industrial automation, sales and marketing, I wanted to go into a completely different field of work, which was leadership development and organization development. And so while the kids were still little and before we made the switch, I decided, well, what do I know about leadership development and organization development? I should go back and get more education. Originally intending to get a master's and fell in love with being back in school and got a PhD. And so we made the switch, but we didn't make the switch till our youngest child was in 5th grade instead of 3rd grade, which was the original intent. And the other thing that we did, which might interest some of your listeners, is that we froze our standard of living when I quit my job and Andy became the sole wage earner. And we did that because we didn't want for me to have the pressure of coming back in X number of years later at the level of income that Andy was going to be stepping out. So we froze our standard of living. We banked the differential between what he made and what it cost us to live, so that when I got back in, I wouldn't even have to make what I'd been making originally. We had a big cushion, a big financial cushion. I told you we were both two very pragmatic people.
I can tell this was some meticulous planning.
And so that's what we did. Wow. And we switched places, and I had just finished my PhD program, and I started my career as a consultant in organization development and leadership development. And Uh, and then also it turned out that one of the members of my dissertation committee had a very good friend who was teaching this course called Interpersonal Dynamics, also known as Touchy Feely, at the Stanford Graduate School of Business. And he recommended I go talk to David Bradford, who some people might recognize as the co-author of our book. He and I ended up writing a book together eventually. But I went to see David Bradford, and he said, "Hey, we're teaching this class, and I think you'd be terrific at it, and we have demand for more, so would you be interested in teaching?" And yeah, on a lark, I said, "Yeah, sure, I'll teach 1/4 a year." I was traveling all over the world the rest of the time. I figured that would be 1/4 a year when I'd be put in Palo Alto where we lived. And that was what began so that was another very big pivotal moment when I decided to go to Stanford Business School to teach part-time a little bit originally, and then ended up becoming known as the Queen of Touchy Feely. So let me pause there and see what questions you have.
Well, I mean, appreciate the insightful track record as you're talking about your husband and you switching places and kids and planning. But my question is, so it sounds like David, this is another kind of switch or just pivot to a degree from what you were doing in marketing or industrial spaces to, teaching and authoring. But you're self-described you're self-described as pragmatic, but you're talking about teaching a class or becoming known as the person that's touchy feely. And I'm not trying to make a general claim, but often you don't maybe describe people as who are pragmatic as touchy feely. So when you stepped into the classroom, how would you have this, like, did you have some of those skills, that to be coined as touchy feely? What did you have to develop or not develop?
Well, it's a really interesting question. I think the first thing to clarify is that the students call it touchy feely. It's called interpersonal dynamics.
Sure.
And second of all, the premise of the course is that being interpersonally competent is a determinant of professional and personal success. So there's a very pragmatic element to the course, which is unless you know how to get the people part right, good luck running a successful business, because people do business with people. So from a pragmatic standpoint and my pragmatism, those things fit very well together. Now, the other thing that turned out to be, in retrospect, a pivotal moment for me, but to answer your question, or to connect some dots, is that before I married Andy, I had gone to work 10 years earlier, right out of college, for the largest industrial automation company in the world. And at the time, I was the first woman hired into a non-clerical job. And that means all the women there were either secretaries or switchboard operators, because yes, I am old. And I was hired as a sales engineer, and I learned pretty quickly that if I was going to succeed, I was going to have to leave all feelings in the parking lot. The irony being that eventually I became known as the Queen of Touchy Feely at Stanford. But at the time, it was very clear to me that I was not going to be taken seriously. I wasn't going to be credible unless I learned to play by the rules that had already been set well before I ever got there, which was no place in business for feelings. So I got reasonably good at that, and I got reasonably good at other things, and I kept getting promoted. And 10 years after I went to work there and I then switched companies to another very large industrial automation company. I was running a $50 million region of the business, sales and marketing, and I was at an offsite with my guys. They were all guys. Eventually I hired some women, but at the time of this anecdote, they were still guys. And I got excited about something I thought we could do, and I got met with crickets, no response. So I got more excited, still no response. And then one of my guys looked, and I was like, "Come on, you guys, this could be so cool." And one of them leaned in and said, "Wait, Carole, is that like water in the corner of your eye?" And And he said, "Are you going to cry?" But then he said, "Are you human after all?" And that stopped me in my tracks. And I said, "You don't think I'm effing human? I don't think there's anything more important for us to talk about than that." I used the full expletive, but I don't want to offend anybody. And I ripped up our agenda, and we spent the next 2 days talking about who we were, why we were there, what we wanted, what we needed from each other. To this day, I believe that was the day I became a leader. And to this day, in retrospect, I think that might have been the most pivotal professional moment of my life, because that was part of what set me on my way once it was my turn to think about going back to work and supporting the family, in thinking, I don't think I want to go back to sales and marketing and industrial automation.
Oh,
I want to go into leadership. I want to go into people development. I want to go into organizational development. And that's what led me to go back to get a PhD or a master's and then a PhD, led to me meeting David Bradford, led me to ending up at Stanford. So that's kind of how all those points connect.
One thing that I would love your input on is, and not input, maybe reflection on, is when your colleague said that to you, were you aware that you were coming across one way? Like, 'cause it sounds like you weren't showing up as human, and called you on the mat, and it really struck a nerve. But like, were you self-aware that's how you were showing up?
I think it stopped me in my tracks, Brian. I think it had never occurred to me that people no longer saw me as human. It just hadn't even occurred to me. And plus, I was a lot younger. And what was I, 30 years old? And I hadn't done nearly all the work that I've done since. So, and I wasn't even aware of how pivotal a moment that had been. Even really, I didn't become aware of how pivotal a moment that was until I ended up in the classroom at Stanford Graduate School of Business teaching MBAs, and becoming known as the Queen of Touchy Feely, and learning, not just learning, but really embracing the fact that people do business with people. And I was put on the planet to help people learn how to connect, and how to connect, especially across their differences. And I don't think I'd ever really kind of realized all those a lot of those anecdotes and stories kind of point towards that, but that didn't become clear to me until I was at the Stanford Business School.
Funny, when we were talking at the pre-call notes and we were talking about the moments, you had not mentioned that. And honestly, I think it's the most grabbing out of everything. Even though all the stories are so interconnected, I'm like, oh wow, you really went there, and that makes so much sense. So, thanks for giving such a raw and open insight into your own career and maybe what has enabled all the shifts that have followed.
Sure.
Thank you. So you took the role with David teaching the class. When you did that, was there, it sounds like, let me just answer a clarifying question and before I ask my next question. Was there already a curriculum in place?
There very much was. There was already a course called Interpersonal Dynamics. It was already called Touchy Feely. There were 3 or 4 other faculty already teaching it. It was already popular. A lot of people think I invented it. I did not invent it. If anybody invented it, it was David Bradford. But what happened was that I was not a career academic. And so when I came on board, because I'd had a career before teaching, I spent a lot of the time connecting dots for students and helping them understand how they were going to use what they were learning, and how I would have been better served had I known what I was teaching and what they were learning. And so I think that was part of what differentiated me from the other faculty. And then kind of took on a life of its own, and then all the students only wanted to take the class from me, and it became a whole thing. And I'd started out part-time teaching 1 quarter a year. Then the school came to me and asked me if I'd consider going full-time and teaching, 3 quarters a year. And at which point I decided, for all kinds of reasons I don't really want to get into, but it was time for me to get off the road. I'd been, traveling all over the world. And so I decided to take the full-time job at Stanford. And then I really became known as the Queen of Touchy Feely.
Got it. What do you think, you said the preset curriculum, you came in, you ended up coming full-time. David clearly had, let's just call him the founder. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely founder.
He had his way of getting it going.
Yes.
But sometimes a founder needs a great co-founder to really make something go. So what do you think you added to the relationship, to the class, the programming, the student body, that?
It's a good question because, you're not the first person to ask that. Also, I used to have colleagues who would come to me and say, I don't understand it. I'm teaching the same thing, but they only want to take the class from you. What's with that? Well, they were marvelous teachers, and they contributed enormously to the curriculum. I mean, the curriculum kept growing. We all contributed to the way the curriculum grew over the years. It was not static. But if there's one thing that I think made me just a little different, was my willingness to live what I taught. So it's probably already pretty obvious that I'm pretty willing to be vulnerable and allow myself to be known. And one of the key elements of becoming interpersonally competent is a willingness to take the risk of allowing yourself to be more known in service of creating a little more safety for the other person, so they'll allow themselves to be a little bit more known. And that's a fundamental element of being interpersonally competent. So, I lived, ate, slept, breathed what I taught. And every interaction with me was congruent with what I taught. And I think that might have been the difference. Now, but since I left, because I did leave in 2017, I loved teaching there. I loved my students. I would have never left, except that I got really tired of the BS from the administrative end of life in elite academia. I couldn't take it anymore. I'd put up with it for almost 20 years and I'd had enough. Plus, my co-founder of Leaders in Tech, which is where I've been now for 7 years, kept actually 8 years, had been chasing me for 10 years to leave Stanford so we could start Leaders in Tech, which was meant to bring the entire Carole Robin curriculum to Silicon Valley tech founders. So in 2017, I left Stanford and we did that, which would be another pivotal moment.
You said something that really resonated. You said congruence. We can talk about Leaders in Tech in the book, all the things, but you matching, sounds like all your interactions, like what you were teaching was clearly very aligned to the core of you, but it brought beyond school, it brought all these other pieces in play that made kind of your life, you weren't like at school over here and then like your friends over here talking about something. How, you were teaching interpersonal ways of being, but I'm going to be a little prescriptive and biased, but I think to have congruence or have that show up elsewhere, like there needs to be a lot of internal work that you do beyond interpersonal work to make that come together where congruence can maybe exist. So my question for you is, you clearly had some pivotal moments at, your company where, about being human, but what, for you to live in that state of congruence, like what kind of personal development things were, or personal work, or things that you were taking on that enabled that congruence to come to life. Does that make sense?
It does make sense, because you're right that in being interpersonally competent requires a certain amount of intrapersonal competence.
Well, that's well said. He said that 10 times better than I did.
So I knew that's what you meant. And you're right. So I had the good fortune of discovering therapy way back when I was going through my divorce before I got married. And that's when I started learning a lot of important things about myself, and where I started learning a lot about where my very driven overachiever came from. So and in retrospect, having now spent many years in therapy off and on, multiple times over 40 years, which is, therapy is very layered. It's like peeling back layers of an onion. I keep learning more and more things about myself. But even back then, it was clear to me that one of the things that drove me so much was relationship. Relationship was, became the most foregrounded element of my life and in importance. And I mean, I did a lot of exploration on what that was about and where did that come from. But it informed it just made me more congruent, to your point, Brian. It was like, oh yeah, it's, I was put on the planet to help people learn how to connect, because connection is so important to me.
I heard a quote one time. It's like, you only have the capacity to see in others what you see in yourself, which can, I think, create really meaningful relationships by seeing things in others, make them aware of things. So what do you think therapy taught? If you don't mind sharing, what did therapy when in your maybe late 20s, whenever you did it, teach you about yourself, or blind spots that maybe you couldn't see, that has helped you show up and cultivate better relationships?
Maybe it taught me early versions of what I learned later. I honestly can't even remember what I might have learned then, because I've learned so many things every time I've gone back to therapy. What therapy has taught me is it has taught me how to meet other people emotionally, which is one of the core elements of being interpersonally competent. It's not just about being empathetic. It's a version of empathy. But meeting somebody emotionally means that they feel truly, genuinely heard by you and met emotionally by you. Even if you don't agree with them, even if you don't see the world the same way they do, even if you see the situation that you're both in conflict about differently. And in fact, anybody who picks up a copy of our book, Connect, can read one of the last chapters, which is a chapter about a huge fight that David and I had, where I said I would never talk to him again. And how one of the ways we repaired that relationship was when I finally felt emotionally met by him, which I had not, and vice versa. And by the way, to this day, we disagree over what we had the fight about, but we repaired our relationship, and we ended up co-authoring a book that sold 160,000 copies. So but therapy was the first place where I started to learn more about what it meant to feel emotionally met, and how my own life experience did not have a whole lot of that until I met Andy, until my husband and I, got together.
Because it sounds like your relationship with him has clearly been so formative and paramount to all your other decisions, given how you structured.
Exactly.
What did it take, though, for him to be able to emotionally meet you at a place where you felt safe to say, this is worth building a life with him and making all my decisions with him off of?
Well, you know, one of the things to remember, I mean, it's a good question. And, to go, one of the things I teach is the concept of stepping outside your comfort zone and being a little bit vulnerable in service of creating relationship and not going too far so that you don't freak yourself or other people out. So I'm going to step outside my comfort zone a little bit, and I'm going to tell you that one of the things I said that I was never getting married again after my divorce. I figured, who needs a man? I had a great life. I had a great career. I had several men in different cities, and life was good. And I wanted a baby, and I was perfectly prepared to have one all on my own as long as I got a good sperm donor. So I was in a place where it was going to take a lot for me to decide I was going to be vulnerable enough to let another man be that important in my life, because I had been so devastatingly hurt by my first husband. And so, the challenge for Andy was there from the very beginning. It was, first he had to convince me that, not all men were assholes. And then he had to convince me that he was a man that I could trust and a man of his word. And then, but back to and then there were lots of things, obviously, that he helped me see. And back to the feeling emotionally met, he never, ever made me feel wrong or argued with me about any of the ways that I was looking at things, or made me wonder whether I'd been the person at fault that, had made the marriage not work. I mean, he just didn't go there. He just accepted what I said and took it at face value, did not judge me for any of it, or one of the keys to meeting somebody emotionally is suspending judgment, which, by the way, is very hard to do. Genuinely, truly suspending judgment. And I could feel that. I could feel the lack of judgment, the absence of judgment. It was such a new feeling for me. I'd been raised in a family where there was a great deal of judgment. I'd been married, I'd been in a marriage where there was a great deal of judgment. I'd been surrounded by judgment my whole life. And suddenly I'm in a relationship with somebody who just loves me for who I am and has no judgment. It was an amazing experience.
Wow, that's special. I mean, clearly some very strong interpersonal dynamics that you had to build a foundation on as you take stock of kind of where you are now and what you taught. So yeah, thank you for sharing all of that. Curious if you told him that, or no, that's special. And it's cool that, in such a society that fails to keep marriages, not that it's been easy, I'm sure, but
yeah, we're no different than a lot. We've had our doubts, but never, Brian, never has a difficult time ever been a time when either one of us questioned whether we were going to stay together.
That's beautiful. Carole, so you had to kind of go to the classroom and then the book and relationships. I mean, you seemed like you had a lot of emotional intelligence and experience informed your kind of capacity to show up for others, to show up for yourself, then to go teach students. I have one question about the classroom, and I want to talk about the book a little bit. For the students that you were teaching at Stanford, as you kind of look at that experience, what were some of the things that stood out about the student body year after year after year, that at the beginning of the semester, students were like this, and then by the end of the semester, the students evolved into thinking like this?
Well, one of the biggest, this word is overused, but transformations that happened in this class is that students walked in at the very beginning with a belief that they needed to spin their image, that they could not allow themselves to be really more known and more seen because other people would judge them poorly or less well than the way they wanted to be seen. And what they discovered was that the more they showed people who they really were, the more people were drawn toward them, liked them, felt connected to them. So it sort of was a big paradigm shift for them. Another thing that a lot of what is transformative about Touchy Feely and Leaders in Tech, because it's basically a lot of the same curriculum, is that it provides an opportunity for you to question your mental models, your beliefs and assumptions about what makes you leaderly, what makes you somebody that somebody else would want to follow, what makes you somebody that other people feel drawn towards and want to be closer to. And, things like, I could never really give you feedback because that'll ruin the relationship. And it'll actually, you won't think as highly of me or you'll feel hurt or whatever, as opposed to thinking of feedback as, I care enough about you to tell you that you're doing something that's actually resulting in my feeling more distant from you, less likely to follow you, less inspired by you. Wouldn't you rather know? Isn't it a caring thing to do, to give somebody feedback? But most people don't know how to do it well. So they learn how to do it well. And they also, because they don't know how to do it well, they've had a lot of instances in their lives where they've stepped on a pile of doo-doo. It's gone really poorly. And so now they've got a fixed mindset about it. No, you can't do that. So a lot of what Touchy Feely does and Leaders in Tech does is it gives them a safe place to experiment and see for themselves what happens to the depth of relationships that get built when you start to test some of these mental models that you hold. Test the validity of them.
Interesting. It's cool that you have empowered people to essentially show up as like
yourself. You're actually way, way more likable than when you try to show up as someone else.
Yeah, for sure. Right. But it's cool that you're able to help people maybe take the layers off to show up as that, to see the impact of how that helps them show up.
Yeah.
Now the book, so to maybe bridge the gap here, the book Connect, are there any sections of that book or models to be able to do that? Like what allows someone to do that? Or anything from the book that, sections that kind of make that possible from, your point of view?
Yeah. So first, let's think about the book as the course, one chapter at a time. So, but it's not an academic book. So we teach all the concepts from the course through stories of a father and a daughter, a married couple, two guys that are buddies, two women that have been longtime friends since college, a pair of colleagues, a man and a woman who work together. So everything is learned through the evolution of these relationships to keep it from being, a dry academic read. We didn't intend to have it be academic. But all the concepts are in the book, and you learn them through these stories. Additionally, at the end of every chapter, there's a section called Deepen Your Learning, so that you can take whatever you learned in that chapter and extract it from the story you just read and apply it to your own life. Based on what you just read about Mia and Anya, do you have somebody in your life who would benefit from, who you're in a relationship with, that would benefit from doing X or Y? So it's, again, very pragmatic. There are a few really core concepts. The first one is this 15% rule that I was talking about, that you step outside, you don't learn and grow or deepen a relationship unless you step outside your comfort zone. But if you step too far outside your comfort zone, you're in your danger zone, and then you freak yourself out and you freak the other person out. So there's this zone in the middle between comfort and danger, which is called the zone of learning. And you have to venture into the zone of learning in order to deepen a relationship. But the students used to say, but the minute I step outside my comfort zone, how do I know I'm not in my danger zone? So we came up with the 15% rule. Step a little bit outside your comfort zone. You'll feel it. You'll know. You'll feel it in your body. But then if I step 15% outside my comfort zone and it goes well, you step a little bit outside yours, we now have a new, slightly bigger comfort zone between us. Then we can step 15% beyond that. That's how we grow and deepen a relationship.
Yeah, it's a really beautiful visual. I like imagery now that connects the words. You clearly did that well.
Thank you. So I'd say that concept, which is in I think chapter 3 around vulnerability and becoming more known. I think chapter 6, which is the chapter that has chapter 7, which has the core model for how to give feedback effectively, and what the upside is of learning to give feedback effectively. Chapter 6 talks about a concept called pinches, which are those little things that people do that annoy you, and that you decide, I'm not going to do anything about it. I'm not going to say anything. I'm not going to make a big deal. But if you're doing something that mildly annoys me and I don't say anything, what are you going to do? You're going to keep doing it, right? And then am I going to stay mildly annoyed, or am I going to get more annoyed? Are we both better off if I tell you? So that's a pretty good chapter.
Yeah, no, the book seems super well thought out. Have you seen the show This Is Us?
Yes, absolutely.
It reminds me, I love that show. I remember watching it for like 7 years, but I remember the way you're describing the book, it's like you meet these moments so real. I mean, I haven't read the book. I probably should now that we've talked, but you meet these moments in people's lives that's so relatable and like strikes them emotionally, and you feel that. And it's something, look, you did the same thing.
You don't know how much when I watched that show, I kept saying, God, I wish I could talk to those writers, because it would be that much richer. It would be that much better if we could have introduced a little bit of this stuff into their dialogue. But I had no way of reaching them.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I had similar thoughts of like how cool it would have been to sit in the back and feel like how they thought about even producing that. Crazy thought that probably went into it. So tell, as we're kind of close out here last few minutes, tell us how you work with people these days, leaders in tech, what's the new form of Carole Robin in the world?
Well, Leaders in Tech is a nonprofit startup that provides programming for founders and now executives in pre-IPO companies. It started out in tech. Tech is now defined quite loosely. Yeah. So LIT, Leaders in Tech, could be thought of more as leaders in transformation. But it's pre-IPO because our mission is to help create healthier, more inclusive cultures in tech. And so what we want to do is we want to have a way of impacting the future Googles and Facebooks and Microsofts of the world, not the current ones. They're a little too far gone. So that's why that's our target audience, pre-IPO founders. And founders, because that's the leadership, and the leadership is what determines the culture of a company. So that's been my primary focus since leaving Stanford. I've had a private coaching business, executive coaching business. I had it the whole time I was at Stanford, and I continue to have it even with Leaders in Tech. It's small. I have to keep it fairly small so that it doesn't take over my life, but I've always enjoyed coaching and still do that.
Wow.
And so those are the two primary professional things that keep me very busy.
Well, it sounds like even to this day, you're living a congruent life, and you really specially share a story and stories, and a beautiful conversation, and really appreciate it. Carole, where can people find you?
Best way to find me is at Carole, Carole, don't forget the E, Carole at leadersintech.org. If you want to know more about me and the book, you can also go to connectandrelate.com. That's the book website. There's a bunch of free resources there that you can download. Download a self-assessment, find out how good you are interpersonally. There's a resource for starting your own study group, all free. And And there's a ton of media, articles written about the book, about the course, podcasts, etc. So connectandrelate.com or carol@leadersintech.org. And I'm on LinkedIn, so feel free to, if you want to connect with me, please don't try to sell me anything. So
It was asked for to get on podcasts. She's great.
that I will probably do, but don't. I don't give out the email that's associated with my LinkedIn profile. I don't give out because too many people try to sell me too many things.
Right.
So, but you can message me on LinkedIn, Carole Robin LLC, I think, or Carole Robin PhD is the LinkedIn, and that's all. I don't know. How did you find me, Brian?
I think you commented on a post and started looking at your stuff. I'm like, I resonate with a lot of what you're saying. And I was like, why not? So yeah, it wasn't this intentional search. I can tell you that. So
yeah. So yeah, happy to. I mean, I was put on this planet to help people learn how to connect. So anything I can do to help people learn that there's this resource available, that it's like a gold mine. Imagine any relationship you're in that does not. Relationships exist on a continuum, and at one end there's contact and no connection. Those are your thousands of Facebook friends, or dysfunction. And at the other end is what we came to call exceptional. The book is called Connect, Building Exceptional Relationships with Family, Friends, and Colleagues. But we're not saying you have to only exceptional is what matters. Imagine getting to just robust and functional. So all the tools will get you at least there.
Yeah, no, this is great. I really appreciate the way you're talking about how people should engage with you or to connect with you. No pun intended. So, Carole, it's been wonderful. Looking forward to watching your work unfold, and thank you for your time today.
Thank you, Brian. It was a pleasure.
Carole reminded us today that the strength of a leader is not in control, but in connection. That vulnerability, shown skillfully, can build trust, repair conflict, and ultimately transform how we relate to ourselves and others. From freezing your family's lifestyle for a long-term parenting plan to becoming the queen of Touchy Feely at Stanford, Carole has modeled what it means to live life in alignment, with purpose, with partnership, and with presence. If today's conversation resonated with you, share it with someone who needs a reminder that real leadership starts with being real. And as always, we are back every Tuesday and Friday with more stories like this. I'll see you next time.